Welcome to the Equity Conscious Leader, a new generation equity podcast and YouTube channel where we chat with leaders about tangible system change and strategies to advance and sustain equity work in their organizations. Our conversations dive deep into the 6 dimensions of equity conscious leadership. So how do you lead with transformational system change for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Let's find out on this episode of the Equity Conscious Leader with your host and educational equity leader, Dr. Jag Lathan.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jag Lathan. Thank you for being here. And we have Mayor Lamar Thorpe. So nice to have you today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about your role.
Well, I'm the mayor of the greatest city God ever created, and that's the city of Antioch. A lot of people don't know that Antioch is one of the oldest cities in California, so we have a long, storied history. We started as obviously a very exclusive community. Throughout its history, throughout its 150-year history, it's been exclusively white. Today, we're one of the second most racially diverse cities in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the fastest growing cities in Northern California. So we continue to build a community that's inclusive, that's diverse, and that's equity focused as we govern through some challenging times in the city.
Yeah, thank you. Tell us a little bit more about some barriers that you noticed in our city.
Well, the barriers started to be broken down in the 1990s when people of color started moving here. Today, we're breaking down more governmental barriers. Historically, it's been run with very old traditions, very exclusive traditions that didn't necessarily make everybody feel included. And even when people were brought in, for lack of a better term, as tokens on certain positions, our voice wasn't really heard and it wasn't really taken serious. And so today we're breaking down serious barriers. I think the election of 22 post-George Floyd America allowed for those in policymaking positions to really start dismantling a system that wasn't for everybody. Today we have a community crisis response team. We've never had that. It's a non-police response team. Today, we've initiated the city's most historic police reform efforts, and a lot of that has been to, equalize certain things. So our police officers now wear body cameras. We now conduct independent investigations of certain police complaints to ensure that there's fairness in the process and to ensure that everyone has an equal playing field, not just residents, but also the police officers. And so I can go on and on about some of the barriers we've broken down, but that's kind of a gist of what we're working towards.
Thank you. So some of the work that we do in equity, and we call it equity conscious leadership. So it's really being focused, being intentional about identifying inequities that we that are around, that are present, that are prevalent, to make changes, right? To make systemic changes. And so what you're talking about, some of the programs and some of the changes that you've made have been because of an inequity that you noticed.
Well, I've noticed inequity since day one that I moved here. I think when we talk about these topics, people, think race, ethnicity. In this city, classism is a real thing. North of the freeway, historically has been white, but has historically suffered as a result of the deindustrialization and the shutting down of coal factories. And so you have a lot of poor working class white people who have lived here in Antioch historically, who haven't had access to government, who haven't had access to the resources that can create upward mobility. The reason we created districts in Antioch was, of course, because of we wanted to enfranchise certain voters, African Americans, Latinos, but poor working class white people have been here disenfranchised for generations. We created District 1, which represents everything north of Highway 4. They've never, for the most part, had representation on the city council until one person was appointed, and that was Martha Parsons a few decades ago. And even when she ran for re-election after she had been appointed, lost the election. So we ensured that people at north of Highway 4 had representation on the city council. So if I have to look back at where we started this work, it started with creating districts on the city council to ensure the regions in our city had equitable representation.
Perfect. So part of the work is around naming the inequity, reflecting on it. So I'm going to give you an example of that. So gathering and analyzing data, identifying the challenge at hand, and engaging in like root cause analysis. Tell the audience, tell us a little bit more about, you can choose, for example, any of the initiatives that you've started. So, for example, the Opportunity Landing Hotel, like I would love to hear about that anyway. But how did you, like, where did that come from? How did you identify the challenge? How did you say this could be a good next step for actually supporting this group of people? What did that look like in the process?
Well, I'll be honest, the Opportunity Village came out of just community frustration with homelessness. And those people were white, those people were Black, those people were Latino, those people were suffering through mental health challenges. That doesn't include all of the types of homelessness that we used to call back then homelessness.
The unhoused.
Didn't include everybody. Didn't include women who were living in cars. And with school children. It didn't include people who were couch surfing, et cetera, et cetera. The rub came with really encampments in our community. And so I'm being very specific about encampments in our community because you can't miss it. And so everybody then has kind of a consciousness around homelessness and what they think it is. And so that's kind of how we started the work. When Joy Motz, a former councilwoman of District 1, got elected, she made homelessness one of her top priorities. I think it was a top priority for everybody. We just had different ways of dealing with it. My approach was literally I campaigned on having a no camping ordinance and removing people from our streets. Now, where did they go? No one really thought about it, and I probably didn't care at the time. That's not a solution. That's not a strategy. That's not a way you solve a problem. And interestingly enough, I learned quickly that people of Antioch have bigger hearts than what I understood. No one was really for that, other than people who generally had a very bigoted, classist, and sexist understanding of the world. But normal, average people really were like, well, no, what are you actually going to do about the challenges around homelessness, and particularly the encampments? So we launched a homeless encampment task force. I did not want to be part of it, but Joy dragged me kicking and screaming because politically I thought it was a dangerous issue to pick up because I thought that there was no solution. And there are solutions that just don't come fast for the world of politics. They just don't. So we started the Homeless Encampment Task Force. We did a lot of learning. We invited everybody to the table. I remember we had panel discussions. We had the county there. We had the fire, just to learn about the impacts of homelessness in our community, or the encampments in particular. I mean, it was interesting, the data that the fire department displayed, because they could predict fires or calls for service based on where encampments were being reported. Our police department, they know the names of our individuals, of our residents who live on the streets. They know them on a first name basis. We talked with Sutter Health here to talk about the impacts that they had in the emergency room, in particular with people who would fake injuries or fake sickness in order to have a place to stay at night when it was raining or extremely hot. And I can go on and on about the panels that we had, but we did a lot of learning collectively as a community. Advocates learned because they started to see the bureaucracy and how it worked. We learned because we began humanizing the experience of our neighbors without houses. That's what I say, our neighbors without houses. They're not homeless. They're not unhoused residents. They're our neighbors without houses. Some of these folks pay taxes when they go to the local stores, whatever. So these are our neighbors without houses. And so through that process, we came up with a series of recommendations that we sent over to the entire city council. This is a long process, so I'm capturing it as quick.
No, actually, this is very helpful because some folks, city officials, superintendents, principals, whoever it is who are leading systems change, they need to know the process. Like, what was it like when you named, when you reflected, you gathered the data, and then when you acted. So this is actually very helpful.
Yeah. So it was a collective effort by everybody. we then took those recommendations to the city council. There was the last homeless encampment task force meeting that we had. We literally showed up and had all the advocates and people who were interested in this topic. And we said, hey, if you had X amount of money and you were all council members, what would you do with this money to specifically deal with our neighbors without houses? And these were where some of these recommendations were birthed. Now that we had done all this exploring and all this learning, no one can come to this one meeting saying, oh, it has to be this way, it has to be that way. No, here are the constraints that government faces. Here are the constraints. And so within those constraints, this is what we got to come up with. And they came up with like vouchers for showers, vouchers for hotels. Everyone we all kind of left this process with, we have to house people in order to stabilize them and then get them the resources that they need. I think many of us walked into this process thinking, you could walk up to any individual, hand them a list of resources, and then they would go fix their life. That's just not how it works. You have to stabilize these individuals who are experiencing these traumas on a daily basis. Remember, this is compounded trauma over trauma over trauma, because every day is a traumatic experience the moment you wake up homeless. And so we took those to council. All of our recommendations were not unanimous. Spending money on these types of efforts it took a long time for some council members to wrap their head around, because we all believed at the time that the county is responsible for this. And that is in fact true. But what we are also accountable to is to the public, and the public was saying, you need to deal with this issue. And merely saying, county, you go take this issue, wasn't sufficient. So we went in that direction. Part of that was building out a new unhoused resident coordinator. That was a new position that came. Hiring on a contractor and a consultant to help us, because we just weren't experts in this. So we got focused strategies, and they helped us focus really on the encampments, because that was our top priority. And then from there, I'll be honest, Ahmad, what was his last name? Ahmad Arbery was killed. So we all kind of were somber. This is 2020. And then next thing you know, George Floyd happened, and the world erupted into chaos. And so post that, or in the middle of the protest and all that, I remember thinking about everything everybody was saying in this process. And I thought, well, why not just lease a hotel and house people? Why not? If we really, truly want to reduce the number of encampments and reduce the impacts that these encampments have, it's not just that some people may look at it as an eyesore. There are actual environmental challenges that go on with encampments, because they have things that they shouldn't have. Batteries to electrify things so that they can cook, but that's dangerous for the environment.
And fire hazard,
all of that, human waste, the oils, all of this is dangerous for all of us, not just them, but for all of us. And so when it rains, all that drains into our system. We're right here off the water where all this dumb drains is our intake valve. We're the only city here that directly pumps water from the Delta. So the needles, the medications, the oils.
Right. So the whole compound.
All of this going into our water, and then we pump it back in and give it to you. And so, and then that's just one example of very many challenges with encampments. And so we went in that direction. Myself, Joy Motz had a press conference, because the politics of all of this, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it seems nice on paper, but in politics, there's also politics.
Especially when you get into the action piece, right? Because when you're talking about it, this is when you're doing, the interviewing, and you're talking to folks, and you're gathering data to figure out, like, what are the best next steps. That's, a lot of people enjoy that. Let's ideate, let's talk about that. But when you actually start doing the work, tell us about that.
I'm a politician with a capital P. And so I think long term, and I thought, we got to build public consensus before we even take this to council. So we had a big press conference at one of our hotels. I had previously talked to the hotel owner, and they seemed open to the idea. And it was out of the blue. I just went there to say, can we lease some rooms from you? And he said, what, don't you just want to lease the whole building? I said, why not? Let's just do it. And so myself and Joy, some advocates and other community partners had a press conference where we announced this was our proposal. And we got some public support. Of course, we got some public pushback, but from people who, out of fear, they just didn't know. And from some people who ideologically just don't believe that government should be spending money on these types of things. They believe that charity is going to come fix all this. So we were able to kind of build some public support around that, push it through council, and I believe it was a 3-2 decision. And then we had to fight internally to make this happen, because when you're adding new components to government, the bureaucrats in the process aren't always for that. They're like, hey, we're doing enough. This is enough. And why are we adding more work to do? So you got to make sure you're in City Hall, making sure that this stays as a top priority.
Can I tell you, Mayor, that is the same for schools. The exact
for
thing.
anything.
Yeah. When you're like transforming systems and you're making decisions that kind of go against what people have already done before or what they're doing currently, it really can upset the system, right? You need to change policy. You need to support people.
Yeah.
I'm just making a connection between what you're saying and systems outside of governmental systems.
Well, I'm glad you said even change policy, because it's not just leasing this hotel. We had to change the zoning. That's an ordinance change. That requires special notification. That requires 2 hearings. That requires, it's like that alone is a 90-day process once you've completed even the draft policy to implement these things. And so that took about 2.5 years to get the hotel up and running.
Wow, to get people in there.
To get people in there, to get the lease, to do the zoning, to get the fire inspections, to get the nonprofit service provider that was going to provide the wraparound services to help stabilize people and then move them on their way. That took 2.5 years. I mean, we started that process when I was on the city council. And I got elected mayor, and then here I am 2.5 years later. We only opened the hotel about a few months ago.
Wow.
Was it in March or February, I believe? Yeah, so it hasn't been that very long. And yet we're having a dramatic impact on people's lives. We've changed people's lives as a result of that hotel.
Yeah.